Welcome to the workshop. I recently put out a video on how to make a rustic leather journal, and I've had a number of comments, and I've also had some direct contact from people who are asking me if I could share some of the tips and tricks that I use when I'm making the projects that I make. So this is the first of our series of tips and tricks, and I'm going to start with something which is probably a tool used by more advanced leather workers. But I would suggest that if you're getting into leather work as a hobby and you want to give something a go, then this thing is an absolute must-have. This is a leatherworker's head knife. It's sometimes called a round knife. There's various names for it, but I was taught that it's called a head knife, and it's what I've called a head knife the whole of my life. Or at least for the whole of my leatherworking life. If it's used properly, it's a fantastic tool. It beats using a Stanley knife or a modeler's craft knife, which is the go-to cutting implement of the new leatherworker. So it's very easy. Everybody's used a Stanley knife, so it's very easy to cut a piece of leather simply having a steel ruler and following the steel ruler down and using a Stanley knife. But if you can master a head knife, you can cut leather accurately and straight and very easily without the need for using a steel ruler. You use a steel ruler to mark it out. You saw me using a steel ruler you saw me using the pattern in the video to mark the lines that I wanted to cut, and then I extended those lines using a steel ruler, and you'll see me cutting, and you've seen me cutting with the head knife, the parts for the journal freehand. So there's various techniques that you need to master when you're using a head knife, not least of which is it works in reverse in almost every respect to a Stanley knife. So with a Stanley knife, you draw it towards you instead of pushing it away, and you apply pressure, whereas with a head knife, you let the knife do the work. So if you get the head knife sharp, and I will be demonstrating in the second half of this video how to sharpen your head knife and get it very, very sharp, you don't actually have to use a lot of pressure. So it is simply a case of, if you've used a steel ruler and you use an awl to make a line, that line is going to leave you a thin groove. That thin groove can then guide the knife, and you don't have to apply any pressure at all. You don't have to go through a thick piece of leather in one pass either. You can repeat the passes. If you're careful and you're slow and you take your time and you don't apply pressure, then you can do it in 2 or 3 passes and everything will be fine. Now, when you look at the experts, people who have been using these things the whole of their lives, they can go through a 5mm piece of leather butt that you use for making belts in one go. But even I don't manage to do that. I prefer to take my time and to do a couple of cuts, and provided I don't put any pressure on, and that's the key thing to understand with any knife is that the chances of miscutting or slipping or going off and actually cutting into the material that you wanted to keep are much greater when you're applying pressure, whether you're pushing forward or drawing back. So if you can reduce the pressure, then you reduce the chances that you're going to go off target. So it is just a case of following the line. So if you're going to cut a line, all you need to do is take an awl and a steel ruler and scribe your line. Mark your pattern out on the leather. Using the head knife, you will literally be able to feel the groove with the tip of the knife, and then just allow the knife to follow the groove. And if you do several passes, you will cut the leather very cleanly. And the key thing is to let it sit back on the back of the wing. So you're not cutting the leather like this, because that's pushing down. You're cutting the leather like that, and you're leaning back into the back of the wing so that you have a much shallower angle and you're putting less pressure on the cut. And if you do that, it really does cut very, very easily. That's all I need to say about the head knife. It's a tremendously versatile tool. It is so much a part of being a leather worker that I would recommend that if you're starting out or you're a novice, go and buy one of these. Now, get a good quality one. This one, again, I'm not associated with the company in any way, shape or form, but this is a CS Osborne head knife. Last time I looked, they're about £70. So they are expensive when you take into account that you can buy a Stanley knife for a tenner and a pack of blades for a couple of quid on eBay. This is a must-have. If you can master this, it will give you so much confidence in everything else that you do with leatherwork, because everybody fears this thing, and trust me, I fear this thing. I'm scared silly by this. I keep all of my fingers well away from the operating end of this knife, because this knife is sharp. I've cut myself on this before and I've gone down to the bone. Okay, I have a history for hurting myself, and we won't go into that right now, but seriously, the front end of this bit, you've seen it go through the leather. Okay, it would go through your finger down to the bone before you even realise you did it, and because it's so sharp, you wouldn't feel you'd done it for a couple of seconds until a couple of seconds afterwards. So it is a tool that needs to be respected, but if you can master it, it's such a wonderful feeling, because it's a traditional tool and the tool has been developed by by the original leather workers, and it's the best tool for the job. It's the only thing that I can say on the subject. If a different tool was a better tool, we'd be using that tool now instead of this. So what I'll do now is I'll show you how to sharpen and maintain your head knife so that it stays razor sharp. So this is how I would sharpen my knife. This is how I sharpen my knife every single time I go to use it. The first thing I would do is start off with an oil stone. I don't know what grit this is. I bought this from a junk shop, basically. I found it in, it's not a junk shop, it was an antique shop in Arundel, I think is where I got it. And I've had this for years and years and years. I've probably had this floating around for 20 odd years. So it's an oil stone. So you get yourself a reasonably good grit oil stone, apply a little oil, smear it on, so you've got oil all over the stone, and then you pick up your head knife. Now, the way to sharpen this is there's three areas on the knife. There's the head of the knife, the top of the knife, and then there's the two wings. And there's a different style for sharpening each side. So to do the head, you'll go down the length of the stone. You'll keep two fingers, one either side, so that you can keep a nice balance. And you'll be doing an S shape like this. And then you can reverse the S shape to catch the other side. You're just effectively trying to sharpen this portion here. And then you can flip it over and do exactly the same on the other side. Now, the really important thing, and I've seen a lot of videos and I'm really unhappy with the way it's been suggested. With a head knife, you don't do circles. Okay, you absolutely do not do circles. The reason being is that when you're pulling away, you're taking metal off the knife and you're sharpening it, but when you're pushing it away, you're digging into the stone and you're blunting effectively the point. That's how I see it. I've been told that when you're sharpening a knife, you only ever draw the blade, be it on a stone, on a strop, on a leather board that I'll show you in a minute. You're only ever pulling it away. And each of these steps that I'm going to talk you through is taking it down to a finer level. So you'll have a stone, and then you'll start on a board with some emery paste, and then you'll go down to jeweler's rouge, and then you'll go down to leather. And each time you're just taking off more and more of the fine burrs, and you're sharpening the blade to the point that it becomes this lethal instrument that I've talked about. So back to sharpening, it's just S's across the stone, like so, to sharpen the head, and try not to fall off the stone like I'm doing. So the next step, maybe a little bit more oil on there might be worthwhile, is to do the wings. And the wings is a much easier step. It's simply a sweep backwards and forwards, keeping it at a nice shallow angle so that you can bring the blade to a really nice point. So and then we switch to the other side. Now when you first get your blade, so when you've bought your first head knife, it's probably going to need a little bit of work to get it sharp, but this is already sharp, so I don't need to do anything more than that. What I've done is the maximum that I would need to do on the stone. It really doesn't need to be any more than that. And I can start to see, I can see the oil, and I can see on the edge of the blade the slight discoloration. You can actually see the grit off the stone, the residue that we've taken off with the stone, and you can see some of the oil on there. So we know we're getting a sharp edge. So having sharpened the head knife on the oil stone, the next step is going to be to use some emery paste on one of these sharpening paddles that I made. Now they're fairly simple, they're just some scrap leather that I've glued on, and I just apply the paste on one side, the jeweler's rouge on the other, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then I have another paddle that I use just for stropping. So the next step is to apply some emery paste. I'm not affiliated to the manufacturer in any way, shape or form. I don't get anything from this, but that's the kind of stuff that you want. And then you literally just take some of the emery paste, smear it on to the paddle. Now again, this stuff lasts on here for quite a while, so I don't tend to do this very often, but it is a while since I've refreshed this, so it doesn't hurt to do it now. Alright, so I can pop that over there, deal with that in a minute. Okay, and we go through exactly the same process as we went through with the oil stone on the emery paste. So it's S, 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 turn it over, S, 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 turn it back, do a reverse S, and then turn it over. There is a massive excess of paste on this at the moment, so I'll just take that off. And then it's just a, oh, that's horrible. And then it's just a sweep. Again, when you're cleaning anything like this, always work away from the blade because it is very sharp already. And I know that sounds very obvious, but I have cut myself many times with this thing. There we go. I'll have that off there. You go away. We're getting there. So I think you can get the idea very quickly how quickly you can do this to sharpen it up. Wow, that's looking good already. So the next step after that is to use this stuff, which is Jeweler's Rouge. And I use Jeweler's Rouge on the other side. I just rub enough of it onto the block for this time. And then it's repeat. It is S for the head. Flip it over. And then the wings again. Yeah, that's coming up lovely. So that's the end of the sharpening. The last thing that we need to do is to just strop. So this is just again, a piece of scrap leather that I've stuck onto both sides of a basic paddle, and this just allows me to strop the blade for a last time and take the very final small burrs off the blade. And it's exactly the same process. S for the head of the blade. And then that's us done. And I am not even going to go anywhere near that with my thumb to see if it's sharp. I can see it's sharp. So what you should end up with when you're finished is you should end up with, you can see this is quite dull on the main head of the blade, but there should be all the way around a clear semicircle of very bright metal. And that is your sharpened blade. That's your cutting blade. Okay, so this is a piece of scrap bridle butt. It's about 5mm thick. It's by far and away the thickest leather that I use in the workshop. Mostly use it for belts. And as you can see, very sharp. And there you have it. That's my thoughts on the head knife, my thoughts on why I think you should go out and get a head knife and learn how to use one. And it's also a quick demonstration on how to sharpen it and how to maintain it. The last point that I would say is that storage, you need to find somewhere safe to store it. If you're a leather worker, you should be able to make a sheath for it. I haven't made a sheath for mine yet. If you're going to keep it in a drawer, because you don't want to keep it in the drawer loose like this, where you might put your hands in and cut yourself. If not, mount it on the wall. For me, I mount it on the wall. I've got 2 screws in the leather working area, and I mount it on the wall, and it just hangs there, and I know where it is, and I'm not likely to cut myself.